African, 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 a new way of being.
Africa unite, Africa unite, yes. Africa unite, 'cause we moving right out of Babylon, and we grooving to our father's land. How good and how pleasant it will be before God and man, to see the unification of all Africans. I just been said already, let it be done. Oh, I'll tell you who we are under the sun. We are the children of the Rastaman. We are the children of the higher man. Africa unite, Africa unite, yes. Africa unite, 'cause we're moving right out of Babylon, and we're grooving to our father's land. How good and how pleasant it will be before God and man, to see the unification of all Africans. I just been said already, let it be done. I'll tell you who we are under the sun. We are the children of the Rastaman. We are the children of the higher man. Africa unite, Africa unite, yes. Africa unite, 'cause we're moving right out of Babylon, and we're grooving to our father's land. 'Cause we're moving right out of Babylon, and we're grooving to our father's land.
For 2021 Black History Month, we got 99 icons, time to color and learn. Hit me. Black history, art therapy. Yo, plan some time for tranquility. Peace of mind or family time. Coloring, yo, is in high demand. Speak the truth, institute to teach the youth about this youth. Black, my people, so beautiful. African, descendant in the Caribbean and Americas. No more deceiving, the great achievements, iconic leaders, ancestral teachers. The legacy, it must live on for all the future generations. To start today, download the page and color your masterpiece from African Marketplace. It's our culture, our heritage. Download the page, download the page, download the page, download the page. For 2021 Black History Month, we got 99 icons, time to color and learn. Hit me.
Good afternoon and welcome to AfriKin 2021 for Black History Month. Panafricanism in a Changing World Order. My name is Alfonso Denicia Brooks, founder of AfriKin, considered to be a social entrepreneur in the business of academic articulation, creative artistry, and cultural industries. I am motivated to use my voice for the presentation and promotion of a positive image of Africa and people of African origin. And so begins our presentation of AfriKin.
Hello everybody, My name is Tovoma Jehuni Dakodono. I'm the Prime Minister, first King of Dahomey. And it's my pleasure today to lead this prayer. And as a Pan-African man, I want to let everybody know just a little short 1 minute story that I learned from all the kingdom that I go to in the whole world. They say when somebody approaches you negative way or say something negative to you, you pray for them. It's so powerful that when somebody approaches you with negative stuff, you pray for them. So I will tell everybody who watching these things, who follow the Pan-Africanism things, people who doing it, that on the name of all the ancestors from Benin, from the whole world, that the family, the job, the health, going to be very good in the name of all the ancestors of the whole world. As my position of being an ambassador for all the royalty, I will bless everybody who come today. In the name of all the ancestors, may God bless everybody. Peace and love from Africa. Thank you very much.
Welcome to AfriKin 2021, a virtual celebration of Black History Month brought to you by AfriKin in collaboration with Pan-African Heritage World, Florida Africana Studies Consortium. We present today Pan-Africanism in a Changing World Order. The reshaping of geopolitics amid escalating tensions aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic is accelerating the transition to a more fragmented world order in which the future organizing principles of the international system are foggy. As in previous orders, African peoples the world over are called to reassess the thoughts and principles that have been responses to their experiences in the 20th century and to forge new conceptualizations for their place in this emerging order. Of all these responses, Pan-Africanism has sustained African peoples from their struggles for liberation to the construction of official continental and transcontinental unity. How has Pan-Africanism impacted the development of African consciousness and the quest for unity? Can the concept be redeployed in global Africa's search for new paradigms in setting its place in this new coming order? How decisive will Pan-Africanism be in setting global Africa's trajectory toward a new African century? And can this new order depart from the unicentric articulations of its predecessors? It has been argued that if global Africa is a context, then Pan-Africanism is its ideology. Pan-Africanism in a Changing World Order brings thinkers of the Pan-African world to revisit the concept of Pan-Africanism, its history and achievements, and its potential for articulating global Africa in the order to come. If the majority of Africa's global communities cannot access the academy, then we bring the academy to the people. Pan-Africanism in a Changing World Order brings the thoughts on the concept to communities which can gain this knowledge that they can then apply to other aspects of their lives. Presented in a language accessible to communities, Pan-Africanism in a Changing World Order rekindles this concept at a time when the Black world is confronted with new forms of exclusion and violence. Our panelists include Professor Rupert Lewis, Professor Emeritus, University of the West Indies, Mona campus, an expert on Garveyism and Pan-Africanism, particularly its emanations coming out of the Caribbean. Professor Keisha Can-Perry of Brown University's field is Brazil and Afro-Latin communities, looking at the way that women are represented in these communities. Professor Pashington Obeng of Ashesi University is an expert in the area of the African diaspora in Asia and has published widely in that area. Professor Ezra Aharoni of the Center for Global Africa at the University of Delaware is an expert in the field of sovereignty. And we also have performance by Ngoma Zetu of South Africa. We welcome you to a wonderful encounter. Hi, I'm Professor Carol Boyce Davies, and I am African.
I am Dr. Rupert Lewis, Emeritus Professor in the Department of Government, University of the West Indies, and Research Fellow in the P.J. Patterson Center for Caribbean Africa Advocacy. I will be speaking on Panafricanism in a changing world. Thank you, Babacar Mbao, Executive Director, Florida Africana Studies, and Chairperson, Professor Carol Boyce Davis. Thank you, Professor Kojo Yanka of the Pan-African Heritage World, Accra, Ghana, and Mr. Alfonso Brooks, founder of AfriKin. Let me acknowledge also today's presenters. 21st century Pan-Africanism has a rich and substantial tradition rooted in the centuries of struggle against slavery, colonialism, and white supremacy. Let me begin with some facts. 12.5 million Africans were brought to the Americas over some 350 years during the transatlantic trade from the 15th to the 19th centuries. 10.8 million survived the Middle Passage and arrived on foreign shores. 1.7 million perished. Let me speak a little about the Zong. On November 29, 1781, nearly 240 years ago, 130 enslaved Africans were thrown overboard the slave trading ship, the Zong, so that their owners could collect insurance on their lives. The overcrowded ship left Accra in what was then the Gold Coast, now Ghana, on 18th August 1781, with 442 enslaved Africans. This was twice the number of people it could accommodate, and due to navigational errors, the ship lost its way and ran short of water. The Zong arrived in Black River, Jamaica on 22nd December 1781 with 208 enslaved people. 234 lives were lost. Over 3 million Africans were brought to the British Caribbean, and through their labor, untold wealth was made that developed British banking, insurance, universities, enriched generations of British politicians, including the former United Kingdom Prime Minister David Cameron. In 2015, when Cameron spoke in the Jamaican Parliament, saying slavery was a long time ago and calling on Jamaicans to move on, to forget the past, the two main parties were united in their rejection of Cameron. P.J. Patterson, Prime Minister of Jamaica from 1992 to 2006, in an open letter to Cameron, was unequivocal. He wrote, "It was and still is a most heinous crime against humanity, a stain which cannot be removed merely by the passage of time. Those who perished in the Middle Passage and the fatal victims on the sugar plantations were the victims of genocide. This is a crime in accordance with international law." At emancipation in the 1830s, the 800,000 Africans in the Caribbean were valued at 47 million pounds. The government agreed to compensate the slave owners 20 million pounds and passed an Emancipation Act in which the enslaved had to work free for another 4 to 6 years in order to work off the 27 million pounds promised slave owners. It was they, enslaved Africans, who paid for their eventual freedom in 1838. In order to raise the money to pay reparation to the slave owners, the British government borrowed 15 million pounds from the Rothschild Syndicate, which is approximately 200 billion pounds in today's money. It was in 2015 that the bond payments were completed. So reparation has been paid in the Caribbean, but they were made to the enslavers. 20 million pounds sterling were paid, and Sir Hilary Beckles has argued that the figure was twice that amount, as the planters were able to get some 25 million pounds more in free labor during the apprenticeship years of 1834 to 1838. Reparation is well overdue to the descendants of the enslaved. After 300 years of slavery and colonialism, Britain refused any compensatory plan or development finance comparable in any way to what had been extracted from their Caribbean colonies. For 90 years, the Rastafarian movement has kept the memory of reparative justice alive. This has been reinforced by their cultural impact in reggae music. The names of Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, Bunny Wailer, Burning Spear, and many others come to mind. In 1993, there was a Pan-African reparation meeting in Abuja, Nigeria, organized by Chief Moshood Abiola, a wealthy Nigerian businessman, and the Jamaican High Commissioner to Nigeria, Pan-Africanist Dudley Thompson. Participants included Bernie Grant, the British Member of Parliament of Guyanese descent, Lord Anthony Gifford of the United States, of the United Kingdom, and George Nelson, Rastafarian and founder of the Jamaican Committee on Reparation around 1991. The 21st century has seen the development of institutions to campaign for reparation. Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor of the University of West Indies, is the chairman of the CARICOM Reparation Commission, which was set up in 2013. He led Barbados' delegation to the 2001 Durban Conference in South Africa and is the leader of the movement for reparation in the region, working closely with Caribbean prime ministers and presidents. He's author of the very important volume, Britain's Black Debt: Reparations for Caribbean Slavery and Native Genocide. In 2017, by decision of CARICOM Vice Chancellor Hilary Beckles, established the Center for Reparation Research, and the founding director is Professor Vereen Shepherd, the distinguished historian of the Caribbean, who has built a global network of researchers on the transatlantic slave trade and is vice chair of the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. In 2020, Vice Chancellor Beckles established, along with former Jamaican Prime Minister P.J. Patterson, the P.J. Patterson Center for Africa-Caribbean Advocacy, which seeks to build bridges between our regions, build links between the African Union and the Caribbean community, and has initiatives to develop collaborative projects between the University of the West Indies and universities on the African continent. I am the research fellow in this center. The 10-point CARICOM plan for reparation for native genocide and African enslavement calls for, firstly, a full formal apology. Secondly, repatriation. Thirdly, Indigenous Peoples Development Program. Fourth, cultural institutions, memorials, museums. Fifth, measures to deal with the public health crisis, especially diabetes and hypertension. Six, measures to raise educational access at all levels. 7, an African knowledge program. 8, measures to deal with the psychological impact of centuries of slavery. 9, technology transfer. 10, debt cancellation. I have been a member of the National Council of Reparation since 2009, and in Jamaica we have embarked on national consultations with schools, communities, the church, and civil society. COVID-19 has disrupted the outreach, but online work has been stepped up. Lawyers in the National Council have prepared a legal case to be presented to the British Privy Council. We intend to ensure our populations are informed and mobilized in Africa and the diaspora. Develop a global network and common position between the African Union and the Caribbean community on key global issues. Encourage new initiatives in business, culture, science and technology in Africa and the diaspora. Develop allies within the US Congress, the US White House, European parliaments, and bring the campaign to universities and the mass of the population. Ensure African people have an understanding of our histories and connections. And finally, we have to reimagine the kind of societies we want to live in and the institutions that are essential to healthy lives. 2020 was a historic year of resistance to white supremacy and class exploitation. And we saw in response to the televised murder of George Floyd and in so many other demonstrations, the red, black, and green flag carried by protesters. These are the colors of the movement led by Marcus Garvey, who championed the freedom of Africa and Black peoples throughout the world. The Garvey movement provided new directions in self-reliant economic initiatives, Afrocentric cultural transformation, the struggle for sovereignty, and a place in the reorganization of the world. These are the colors of Panafricanism, of transnational Black mobilization. And the people carrying the red, black, and green helped to remove Trump from the most powerful executive position in the world. Kamala Harris's attainment of the post of Vice President of the United States is a signal moment for women, African American women in particular, and for her ancestral communities in Jamaica and India. This virtual gathering is a meeting place for new institutional initiatives. There is underway a substantial economic shift from the West to East, from the United States and Europe to China and emerging markets and economies in Asia. Post-colonial Asia, including China, Vietnam, and other countries, have much that African countries can learn when it comes to carving out a place in the global economy. The question of the economic development of the continent to meet the needs of its growing young population is the key question of the 21st century. It is also the central question for the global African diaspora, whether in the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean, Europe, or Asia. COVID-19 has shown up the huge disparities in health, economic status of our populations. Our work is cut out for us and future generations. I am African.
Boa tarde, buenas tardes, good afternoon. And for many of you throughout the world, it's already good evening. So thank you for being here. And my name is Keisha Khan Perry, and I am African. I join you from the traditional homelands of the Narragansett and Wampanoag peoples in Rhode Island, where the Aboriginal struggle against land loss continues to this day. I want to thank Professor Carol Boyce Davies for inviting me to participate in AfriKin's Black History Month event. And thank you to Babacar Mbao and Alfonso Brooks and numerous others who brought us together as a virtual community. I would like to begin as well by uplifting the memory of my dear Brown University Africana Studies colleague, teacher, and friend, Anani Gizenyo, who transitioned to the realm of the ancestors on October 25th, 2020. Anani was a staunch Pan-Africanist who carried out extensive transnational research on Africa and Afro-Latin America. He was one of the first, in fact, to use the term Afro-Latin in North America. He taught and mentored undergraduate students and graduate students for over 40 years and radically shaped the field of African and African diaspora studies. In the days following his passing, I decided to teach the spring course, spring 2021 course, AFRI 1941, Archiving the African Diaspora, the Life and Works of Anani Gizenyo. I'm teaching this course in person this semester, and the emphasis is on understanding his intellectual and pedagogical legacies, specifically his role as an archivist of the African diaspora, and also giving students the opportunity to do hands-on work to preserve his books and papers for donation to the Tougaloo College and Brown University libraries. Over the winter break, I spent numerous hours packing up his home office, where he collected a significant amount of books and original documents on key figures of the African diaspora, such as Kwame Nkrumah, and Abdias Nascimento. And I should add that, and the emphasis is on his home office because the campus office is still intact, where we'll be filming and taking photographs in the upcoming days. And a lot of students remembered that space being a key space for learning, exchanging ideas and conversations, where he did a lot of reasoning over decades and shared books, papers, etc. And they felt like that was a safe space. So, but the emphasis now is on the over almost 1,700 books that we've collected from his office. So Anani kept everything from event posters to newspaper clippings to pamphlet. He bought everyone's books, right, including some of the more recent books. He also reviewed a lot of journal articles and book manuscripts, which also meant he was constantly receiving the newest and the latest works from university presses. I came across a letter he received from Cuban scholar activist Carlos Moore, who wrote from Senegal to ask Anani to purchase some books and to describe his encounters with Afro-Brazilian activist scholar Lélia Gonzalez, African-American anthropologist Angela Gilliam, and another Afro-Brazilian activist Abdias Nascimento. I also found a postcard that Lélia Gonzalez sent to Anani in 1983 after traveling in Nicaragua with Elisa Larkin Nascimento and Abdias Nascimento. I found a letter Anani wrote to Catherine Dunham in 1985, narrating how her denouncing racist treatment against her in a Rio de Janeiro hotel led to the passing of the Alfonso Arinos law of 1951. And these are examples in terms of the letters that I found that showed important kind of Black hemispheric connections between African Americans, Afro-Cubans in the anti-racism struggles. I also found a beautiful photograph of Anani, Rhett Jones, and renowned Brazilian artist Gilberto Gil at Brown in 1995. So Anani was both an archive. He knew so much. He told us he could tell you so many stories about his experience, but he was also an archivist of the African diaspora. And more importantly, I understand these letters to be telling us a story of how he was an ambassador, right? He was a bridge between Africa and the Americas, between North America and South America, between Portugal and Lusophone Africa and Brazil. He saw the classrooms of Africana studies at Brown as key spaces to teach about the most invisible Black population of the Americas, with an emphasis on social movements around citizenship rights and cultural belonging. He had former students, for example, in Ecuador, where he visited more recently. Last September, Anani asked me to gather some books, papers, and some coffee and chocolate, some Colombian coffee, actually, a gift that a former student had sent to him from his campus office that he could no longer access due to COVID restrictions. He insisted that I find a blue folder with an original essay with handwritten notes by Lelia Gonzalez, because I told him about an essay I was writing on Gonzalez, Teresa Santos, and Angela Gilliam, and I'll talk more about their relationship later on. I found the books in the coffee, and I can tell you that I searched for a very long time, but I could not find the Gonzalez essay or the chocolates, which I was more interested in finding the chocolates. Gonzalez is one of the most celebrated Black feminist scholars in Brazil and was one of the first women to receive a PhD in anthropology. In her short life, she traveled extensively around the Americas and Africa, where she met Carlos Moore, giving lectures on the plight and resistance of Black Brazilians, and she was a prolific writer. She has been compared to Angela Davis, and I would add comparison to Claudia Jones because of her Black left feminist ideas. However, I begin with my memories of Pan-Africanist scholar Anani Jizenia. Some of you may be wondering why, because he was the one who introduced me to the idea of Lelia Gonzalez as a key architect of Africana studies as a field of study in the United States, right? So partly what I've been trying to understand, and Anani told me, is we need to start thinking about what her role is in the construction and the internationalization of Africana studies in the United States. I owe much of my scholarly emphasis on the Black woman, a mulher preta, a mulher negra, as a category of humanistic and social science inquiry in Latin America to Black left feminist and scholar activist Lelia Gonzalez. Centering the ideas of Black women scholars has framed my scholarly and pedagogical journey. While a graduate student, I was first introduced to the political ideas of Lelia Gonzalez, reading her essay in Pierre Michel Fontaine's edited volume, Race, Class, Power, and Race, Class, and Power in Brazil, published in 1985. Angela Gilliam, I was introduced to in David Elwig's African American Reflections on a Racial Paradise, published in 1992. And the ideas of Teresa Santos I came across in Michael Hanchard's anthology, Racial Politics in Contemporary Brazil, published in 1999. Angela Gilliam would end up serving on my dissertation committee, and my emphasis centered her Black feminist ideas along with those of Lelia, Teresa Santos, Beatriz Nascimento, Sueli Carneiro, Vilma Hayes, and Luisa Bairros, entre muitas outras, or just to name a few. During this dissertation phase and the early years of my career in teaching in Africana studies, I learned more about Gonzalez with key texts by Alex Hatz and Flavia Rios, Raquel Barreto, and Sueli Carneiro. These scholars have led to the resurgence of Lelia as a key scholarly focus, as well as key scholarly as well as activist figure worth studying and teaching in our classes on Black Brazil. But even in graduate school and later as a professor and in professional circles in Black studies, feminist studies, and Latin American studies, these names are still not known, not seriously engaged as producers of theoretical frameworks, or cited as an ethical practice of recognizing the work they have done over decades. As Black feminist thought started to grow and gain scholarly relevance, mostly North American Black feminists gained notoriety and were translated and read more widely in Spanish and Portuguese. Three key figures that have been translated a lot have been Angela Davis, Bell Hooks, and Patricia LaCans. And I actually have an essay written about how the emphasis, why people love Bell Hooks in Brazil. And I would say, and this essay doesn't cover Angela Davis, but I would say more recently, there's been a lot of emphasis on translating the works of Angela Davis. More recently, Edilza Solteiro and I translated the work of Trinidadian Claudia Jones precisely because of her Black left feminist ideas as a core member of the Communist Party, and she had even been exiled to England. Her radical ideas are oftentimes left out of histories of Black and feminist intellectual tradition because of these ideas. And partly, and I'll talk a little bit more of that, but partly we made a decision to translate her work because of her relationship, her commonality in terms of her ideas to Lelia Gonzalez. It is in the aftermath of the assassination of Marielle Franco 2 years ago that Edilza and I began to frame an essay as well about the history, present, and future of the Black left in Brazil. We produced a short version of that essay entitled The Black Diaspora Feminism of Lelia Gonzalez that included some early reflections on the impact of Lelia's travels on the diasporic nature of her feminist and Black consciousness. Despite the frequency and significance of her travels, she's rarely considered a contributor to diasporic Pan-Africanist thought or making Brazil a key dimension of Africana studies and globalizing Black studies in general. Lelia Gonzalez spoke in my department at Brown in 1984, invited by Anani Jazenio, for example. And I should say that over the years, Anani, he brought so many people, a lot of Black, Jean Georges, Vera Benedito, there's so many Black activist scholars that he brought to the classroom, right? I also found a video of Lelia speaking in English to an audience at Florida International University about the plight of the Black woman. And Anani and I would talk a lot about what it meant to see Lelia moving with ease throughout the Americas and even West Africa, speaking in French, Spanish, and English, in addition to Portuguese, right? And I can, and any of you who are interested in some of her key ideas, for example, around Africanidade, please reach out to me or look up some of these essays that I've written about her work. But it's fascinating, again, that she is doing so much movement throughout the Americas, but we don't hear about her as one of the key figures, a key early theorists of Pan-Africanism. I would argue that more work needs to be done on Lelia's significant contribution to the formation of these fields of study in North America. What can we learn from the political life and ideas of Lelia Gonzalez, who played a key role in the diasporization of Black movements against the military dictatorship and for democracy in Brazil? And you can see that even in the letter from Carlos Moore, that he's already talking about, and there are other excerpts as well, where he talks about just how much Lelia is teaching him about what's going on with the plight of Black Brazilians. That said, it is reading more about Lelia's travels and articulating the systematic erasure from Africana studies that I began to think about other women traveling to and from the United States, across the Americas and West Africa during the same period, but are rarely referenced. Teresa Santos is one such activist thinker who has not been given the same scholarly attention as Lelia, right? In recent months, I discovered that Michael Hancher, political scientist at University of Pennsylvania, has recorded interviews of Teresa Santos that I could use to understand how she traveled extensively throughout the Americas and West Africa in similar efforts to Lelia to disseminate knowledge of and mobilize international support for the Black Brazilian struggle. Teresa has a unique history of fighting in the anti-colonial liberation movements in Angola and Guinea-Bissau and was imprisoned in Angola. She worked alongside Amilcar Cabral and made her mark on the guerrilla struggle against colonialism. And in this research, I've begun to examine how this anti-imperialist activism shaped her Black movement and feminist work in Brazil. So you see people like Teresa Santos going to West Africa, participating in those social movements, paying the price, and then also taking those ideas back to Brazil, right? And then also traveling to the United States and speaking at US universities in terms of Black studies departments. So more than writing her biography into the history of the Global Black Studies Project in the United States, I'm interested in her theoretical ideas formed out of activism against militaristic states and what they can teach us about this current political moment that we're living, or in the aftermath rather, in terms of the political moment we're living in Brazil and globally. In addition, I'm trying to interpret how this scholarship of U.S. Black feminist anthropology, the scholarship of U.S. Black feminist anthropologist Angela Gilliam, who since the 1960s connected Black experiences in North America, Brazil, and South America, and voiced a distinct African diasporic solidarity perspective that was racist, anti-racist, anti-fascist, and anti-patriarchal. And I should rephrase that and say that I'm trying to connect the works of Lelia Gonzalez and Teresa Santos to Angela Gilliam. And what I also learned from Anani is that Angela Gilliam and Anani are two of the first to begin to come up with a term to understand the Black experience in Latin America, and it's Afro-Latin. That they're the two of them are also part of these early conversations about how to distinguish the experience of Afro-Latin Black people in Latin America. This is Angela. So Angela Gilliam is someone who was Abigias's interpreter in the United States. This is something that people don't talk a lot about. So you have this African-American woman traveling extensively in Brazil during the military dictatorship and wrote about these experiences, as well as extended her anti-imperialist ideas in her work on Papua New Guinea and South Africa, right? So very few people know about not just her linguistics abilities, but the fact that she's working alongside and she becomes a key interpreter of one of the most important Pan-Africanist scholar activists from Brazil, right? So I think that's important. So none of us here today would ever disagree with the idea that these Black women are central to the formation of culture and history of Latin America in general, but more specifically to the formulation of diaspora and Pan-Africanism as a practice and theory. The questions I want to leave you with are, why have they been ignored as scholars, as producers of knowledge on the African diaspora generally? What does it mean to erase Black women? Lelia Gonzalez, Angela Gilliam, Teresa Santos, Beatriz Nascimento, entre otras, or just among numerous others, from our collective intellectual memory? What does it mean for our understanding of racialized patriarchy and violence in knowledge production when the state plays such a key role in this erasure of Black women intellectuals? More importantly, what does this erasure do for a more global and radical vision of racial justice in the African diaspora? Today, I've only begun to scratch the surface of attempting to answer these questions. My personal intellectual commitment to unburying the political activism, writings, and legacies of Black women scholars and activists in Brazil and beyond has only intensified in recent years. Thais Machado and I just completed the English translation of Lelia's essay, A Mulher Negra, Retrato, or Black Women, a Portrait. Furthermore, as the focus on Lelia Gonzalez today reminds us, memory in this instance that brings Black women's intellectual works and ideas to the forefront is also about documenting the development of Black women's social thought, specifically how they've contributed to the significant shift in representations of Black subjectivity and the internationalization of anti-racism and anti-sexism politics. Furthermore, engaging Black women's scholarship and actions seriously in Latin Americanist research expands notion of the particular ways in which Black people experience and politicize race, gender, class, and nation across multiple geographic communities. For those of us committed to social justice globally, aimed at ending, I should say in Latin America, but also globally, aimed at ending racism, sexism, and various forms of oppression, decolonizing thought and praxis must be part of that project, right? So partly what I'm saying here is, if we're seriously interested in a global Black liberation project, we have to take seriously the population, one of the most significant Black population in the world. So, and in a rough conservative estimate, that would be more than 100 million people. What does it mean then for us to ignore the kinds of intellectual ideas and political ideas that are coming out of that region? Right, so I think that's partly what I'm suggesting, right? So how can you consider this work and this Pan-Africanist work without taking into consideration what's going on and the work that's being produced in Portuguese, Spanish, French, etc. So writing from a crucial standpoint of a Black woman in Latin America, so looking at the Teresa Santos and the Lelia Gonzalez, engenders and globalizes political and social justice problem of Black people, but it's also about forging diasporic politics, right? As feminist scholars and activists generating anti-racist knowledge and teaching for social justice in North America, we can no longer sit complacent with our ignorance of what is taking place in the region with the largest concentration of African descendant peoples in the Western Hemisphere, for example. As Lelia Gonzalez's contemporary Benedita da Silva also affirms, we must exchange experiences that can strengthen our struggles and search for new ways to unify Blacks in the Americas, unquote. On the night of her assassination, Marielle Franco vowed to advance her English and quoted Audre Lorde saying, "I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own." I want to end today by overemphasizing this idea that what it means to really read more widely. What does it mean to look at how the largest population of African descendants in the Americas are engaging in Pan-Africanist ideals that are grounded in solidarity politics and liberationist politics, and how they're connecting their struggles against racism and sexism, homophobia, etc., with those happen in the United States. And it can't be a South-North politics of solidarity. It has to be more, we have to take more seriously what's going on in Latin America. But it also means that we have to learn Spanish and Portuguese and French, etc. We have to learn and we have to read the scholarship coming out of that region. We have to take seriously the political activities coming out of that region against fascism. There's an anti-fascist movement still going on. We have to take seriously those struggles and interconnect them with our own. Thank you. Have a good day.
I am grateful to be part of this important conversation. And today, I'm using two organizing principles, which are gestural acts of communication between two sisters. Number two, sites of memory and rededication among Africans in India. Exactly 12 years ago, before my mother, Yabua, daughter of Odunsuni, medicine person Ayakwame, from the Abuasa chief's house of the Asuna clan at Akropong, joined the ranks of the ancestors. She sent a parcel of folded old and new handkerchiefs to her senior sister, Ama Srekubia, who was bedridden at the time at Domponiasi near Adesu in the eastern region of Ghana. Upon receipt of my mother's parcel, her sister Srekubia also wrapped a new and a used handkerchief to be sent to my mother. Srekubia, my aunt, and Yabua, my mother, were bidding farewell to each other because their illnesses made it difficult for them to travel or attend the funeral of the other when that occurred. They were also mourning the potential loss of each other and at the same time affirming their faith and willingness to see each other among the ancestors. They were not just using written documents or digitized messages. They were communicating powerfully across hundreds of miles with each other and their respective communities. At a time that Western essays, forms of literacy, and other canons of communications have been privileged, My mother and her siblings' communication would have been labeled in many ways, including, oh, that's pre-literate, or at best, surrogate language use. Besides the indigenous African languages that have been in use for thousands of years, we know that storytelling, dance, horn languages, spirit possession continue to be Africana people's mode of communication. Today, I offer another example among the descendants of Africans who live in Karnataka of South India. These Africans called cities have been in South Asia for over 1,000 years, and they use sites of memory to perform their identity, to tell and retell their stories. This other example, and to borrow what Dr. Babaka Imbo has described, provides a powerful framework of sovereignty and stewardship for describing, understanding, and expressing the values, vision, vim, and vigor of Pan-Africanism, which will bind, inspire us, propel us along the path of sovereignty and stewardship. Among the gifts of this tradition, I suggest we revisit the ethos of identity performed in relation to sites of memory, where the ancestors are present all the time. So now travel with me to a community in South India, as I indicated earlier, where the people's identities and experiences are embedded not only in the obvious aspects of their social and cultural organizations, but also in their communicative systems, in iconic shrine objects and other religious icons, as well as burial grounds. These African-inspired shrines and burial grounds are sites of spirituality and sources of knowledge and the articulation of African identities. So, now that I've invited you to accompany me to a particular place in India, the name of the deity is called Siddhi Nash, where the descendants of Africans call this deity Siddhi Nash is our God. Siddhi Nash was given to us by our ancestors. Siddhi Nash does not remain the god or goddess of any person or group except us as Africans. Further, the visible objects at the Siddhi Nash grounds become the embodiments of distilled histories, lived experiences, and expressions of Africans that point beyond themselves because they also focus on people, their ways of life, their aesthetics, their philosophies, as well as use such sites for ordering their lives. It is this that I want to draw your attention to with reference to spirit possession. Against the backdrop of the balkanization and the ridiculous but self-serving fragmentations that were imposed on Africa and Africans, which persist. How about the disturbing classifications such as white North Africa, black Sub-Saharan Africa, brown Horn of Africa, and on, or the Swahili coast, or the Lusophone, or the Francophone Africa. Such reductionist categories have been used to help those imposing them the right of ownership for their own control and exploitation. However, it is in the context of African performance practices that we begin to discover the importance of sites of memory, because our notion of community extends and deepens beyond what is obvious and tangible. The relevance of bodily memory and embodied performances, therefore, will help us to produce and reproduce our own stories in non-linear, non-chronological, and non-apologetic ways. What do drum languages, horn messages, patterns in cloth, marks on the body, carvings, wrapped handkerchiefs have to offer the world of COVID, which has rudely reminded us of our common humanity and yet has exposed the fragmented social lives of today? Our world needs values, visions, and the importance of Panafricanism that will inspire and propel us, so that when we perform our identities, regardless of where we are, we will be able to discover the richness of our own traditions, the visible and the invisible parts of our distilled histories. So now, let me just share aspects of Sidi Nash, which I mentioned earlier, which has devotees of descendants of Africans. They annually supplicate this deity, and they are in farming communities, so they depend on the forest and other natural resources. These Africans in India invoke their deities to protect the land, protect their animals, and engender fertility for humans as well. What they end up doing is they strive to live in harmony with nature, because their ontology, their understanding of their identity of being is tied to nature, tied to plant life, tied to animals. This gives us an impression of a people whose ontology is richer than those who live to conquer the world, but they rather handle the world delicately because it is their life. It is a people living in harmony with their natures. Now listen to conversations that some of them have shared with me regarding their own sacred grounds and sacred activities. According to them, their sacred area, which is called Sidi Nash, has two separate sections. They have low walls with planted stones in the middle. They have male Sidi Nash as well as female Sidi Nash. But each of the areas has a basil plant. And what happens is that during the celebration, it's simple stones, as one would say. These are aniconic objects without any decorations, without any paintings. They sit there. These particular rocks, according to them, were revealed in dreams and visions to their forebears. And they were empowered by the spirit being to construct the ritual objects and spaces and rituals that they perform today. Such sacred space and rituals help give form and substance to what Morrison calls re-memory, in which the participants reclaim and bring to the surface that which lies deeper than the memory of events can be claimed. Sidi Nash, therefore, provides a context into which the descendants of Africans can and reenact and then project themselves into the future. Further, Sidi Nash is drawn upon to promote neighborliness, punish persons with the evil eye who can cause failure, for their neighbors. In their devotion to the deity, they promote society's well-being, fellow feeling, systems of check and balance to foster community development. The people therefore seek Sidi Nash's powers to protect their crops from failing, prevent animals from destroying the crops, as well as pay tribute to their ancestors. This site has become an important pilgrimage place as these Africans that live thousands of miles away from continental Africa build closer ties among themselves. So, what is the role of spirit possession in this whole sacred site? Spirit possession that results from the presence of a spirit in a person's body causes certain behavior patterns in the host's body. This can occur under a variety of circumstances, including recitation of a prayer, the ringing of a bell, song, dance, drumming, or the ingestion of certain substance. The deities would appear only through specific individuals with whom they work out their will. And since these people have become agents of modernity for their own citizens, these mediums or the host bodies perform different bodily memory activities. So the religious sites have become the places where they go to renew themselves and their notions of influence to frame and project their beliefs as well as their identity are what I want to suggest to you. In addition to that gestural act beside and between my mother and her sister, I am suggesting that in this fluid moment, we can also pay attention to how possessed persons may roam sacred grounds, sit quietly, tremble, and speech patterns that they will use in speaking languages that we have often forgotten or not paid attention to or taken as gibberish, because the religious specialist or medium uses communication channel to transmit information to the living as well as to the spirit world. This reminds me of a distinctive act by one of the people that were worshipping or expressing devotion to Sidi Nash. The skillful movement of that religious specialist body enabled him to combine choreography, aesthetics, piety, spiritual power as he danced and others joined him. This man was filled with explosive power that made him spiral many times until he entered a nearby river. His name is Sidi Puta, the possessed religious specialist. And when he entered the water, the embodied deity, before cooling off, according to him, the knowledge that he gained from the spirit world was so combustible that the messages he received from Sidi Nash, the deity, could not be contained in his body until he rolled or spiraled into the body of water to cool him. He said by entering the water, he was also cleansed of the dangerous and creative power of the spirit being, the deity. Such cooling off means the end of a circle and a cycle of possession. What he heard, saw, sensed, touched in the spirit world made him strike his hands on the ground and claim that the deity had made him express certain behavior patterns. What I'm suggesting, therefore, is that the creation, dissemination of knowledge should not be limited to just the mind, but also the senses. All those sensual aspects of the human being have to be included in our knowledge production if we are bringing our people together. Because through the patterns of vocal stress, change of tone, and other behavior patterns, we could see that the human being possessed was operating on multiple levels and not just an academic, rational, intellectual levels, but rather his very body was also the zone of knowledge, the zone of creation of knowledge. This phenomenon of using words and phrases and names that come from religions, parallel ritual activities among African Brazilians, Afro-Cubans, African Surinamese, and I'm reminded of the Saramaka in Suriname, people whose forebears arrived from parts of present-day Ghana and have been in Suriname for many years. It is only during rituals that they speak Akan Ghanaian language. And this happens when the person has come into or under spirit possession. Ritual context, therefore, for Africans, wherever they are, with aspects of their lives, can be another zone where the hidden, protected aspects of their lives can be manifested. For instance, in Canada, in South India, the Sidis, the descendants of Africans, are heard to say, Navu, African Dandi, Banda Deve. We came from Africa. We are one people. Before we became Hindus and Christians and Muslims, we were one people. Before we entered India, we were one people. Their Africanness therefore stays with them, but in their flux of interacting with other Indians, they are not able to express this until they have come together and under spirit possession, under circumstances that make them reconnect with their ancestors, that they call Hiriyaru, the worship of the ancestors or the veneration of the gods and ancestors, they are able to articulate other dimensions of their lives. What I'm suggesting, therefore, is that spirit possession become an important religious practice among not only Karnataka African Indians, but may it remain an important phenomenon of Africans in continental Africa, diasporic African communities in the Caribbean, Brazil, United States, Oman, Yemen, because as they maintain in India, Siddhi Nash and other sacred sites, they stress their connectedness and their obligation as caretakers of the gifts their ancestors gave them to ensure that the company they keep with one another and with their African Indian ancestors and other Africans will be maintained. Therefore, just as my mother wrapped her handkerchiefs and gave them to her sister in order that the exchange would affirm their belief in something beyond the present. So do I hope that those that belong to the African community will continue to find nonverbal means of communicating with one another to affirm our Africanness. Thank you. I am Professor Pashington Obing, and I am an African.
I want to give thanks to our presenters today, Dr. Carol Boyce Davies, Dr. Rupert Lewis, Dr. Keisha Khan Perry, Dr. Pashington Obeng, Professor Ezra Aharon, and Mungezi Ntaka of Ngoma Zetu. I also want to give thanks to Professor Kojo Yanka and my mentor, Baba Kaimbao. Also thanking Sa Majesté Dada and Makarege Samba from Brazil. I hope you guys are enjoying the broadcast. Thank you.
Greetings. I am Professor Ezra Haron, and I am African. I want to speak to you today about some of the work that I'm doing in Africa in relation to my Center for Global Africa at Delaware State University and some of the partnerships that we have. And all of these things that we're doing, I look at as a means of fostering what I would define as a modern day version, a modern day interpretation of Pan-Africanism. And I say modern in a context that I would argue that freedom is like a moving target. And so the freedom that we espouse today, the way we live our lives is transformed in the ways that we looked at and viewed freedom in the 60s. Where you sit on the bus is relatively cosmetic. So sitting in the front of the bus, the back of the bus, you know, the big question revolves around the geopolitics of the time. You know, where does the oil for the bus come from? Where the rubber for the tires? And so the big challenge of Pan-Africanism is to keep a pace with the times. And in moving forward and looking at freedom, looking at Pan-Africanism in a modern day context, one of the great things in our favor is that technology has advanced in a way that Pan-Africanism can be practiced and can be looked at as an ongoing thing. It's a continual act, because in the palm of your hand with your smartphone, with this conference that we're doing on Zoom, with social media, we're reaching people in the millions. And this allows us to have access in ways to people and audiences that in past times, such access was only available to countries and to corporations, and now individuals have this ability to do so. And within that same context of looking at the way technology has evolved and the way that technology can enhance what we're doing as Pan-Africanists, it's important to note that one of the greatest forms of capital, one of the greatest forms of resources today has to do with intellectual capital. The ability to think creatively, the ability to take ideas, transform ideas into real-time opportunities that not just benefit us as Africans, but that we can play a evolving and a more meaningful role on the global stage. And that brings us to some of the work that we're doing at the Center for Global Africa at Delaware State University, which is a enterprising think tank institution that is designed to take the intellectual capital of the diaspora and merge it with the economies of Africa in ways that are solution-oriented, in ways that are revenue generating. So the idea of revenues has to be attached to some way in terms of problem solving. And that's a big challenge that we have, because as much resources, as much intellectual capital as we have as the diaspora, the big challenge again is to create structural designs that are going to allow the facilitation of ideas and the facilitation of initiatives to come into fruition. And just this past November 2020, we had our second annual Pan-African Development Conference, which was virtual this year. And that conference that we had through the Center for Global Africa was done in conjunction with our strategic partners in Africa, the African Peer Review Mechanism, or APRM. And African Peer Review Mechanism is an agency of the African Union that evaluates governance and the socioeconomic performance of nations. And that's done with the view to make recommendations that nations implement towards the success of achieving Agenda 2063. And Agenda 2063 is Africa's 50-year blueprint for development, prosperity, productivity that all 55 member states of the African Union are working towards achieving. And those designs also fold into the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And so the Center for Global Africa is working closely with APRM to create a means of diaspora participation and contribution to that process. And the African Union is committed to this process of involving the diaspora in African development, so much so that the African Union has designated Africans in the diaspora as the sixth region. Africa has 5 geographical regions: Northeast, Southwest, and Central. The sixth region is not geographical, but rather ancestral. It embodies the Africans who are African by ancestry, African by blood, who live outside continental Africa. And that was done in order to encourage those of us in the diaspora to feel a more inclusive part of what is going on in Africa and being able to make viable contributions to African development. So at our recent conference, we had participants from 17 countries. We had private partner entities from 40 countries, and we had professors from at least 29 universities. from Africa and the US, all coming together to address issues that we could commonly work towards in terms of, as I said, solution-oriented, revenue-generating initiatives that can bring about Pan-African ideals in a modern fashion. And so as much as Pan-Africanism, as we have known it to be over the decades and the past century, now we have the ability on an institutional level, using technology and advanced platforms of technology, to bring about a new era of Pan-African relations. That I feel this new era is very exciting because at the Center for Global Africa, we're working with other HBCUs to collaborate, to tap into a lot of the relatively untapped intellectual capital of HBCUs, to join in partnership with African institutions to, as I said, to create this new wave of Pan-Africanism that could be very functional with the contributions and the support of other institutions and industry partners that we look to identify and work with closely. APRM uniquely gives us the ability to interface and have access with 40 African nations. Those are the 40 member states of APRM. And so in a historic fashion, you have an HBCU entity in the Center for Global Africa that is so closely aligned and working with African governments. It's a form of living, breathing Pan-Africanism that we're very proud of, and we look to the future excitedly to join forces with some of you in the listening audience and to collaborate to see how we could work more closely together to materialize some of the ideas that we all have that we aspire to achieve. And so I thank you for your time, and I look forward to addressing any questions and even more so partnering with some of the good people in the audience. Thank you so much. And once again, I am Ezra Harone, and I am AfriKin.
African is the perpetuation. African is no end. We are all African.
Our performances today come from South Africa by Ngoma Zetu, featuring Masawuko and Mongezi Ntaka. Mongezi Ntaka is a producer and guitarist extraordinaire that has worked with the likes of Lucky Dube, Vusi Malasela, and Hugh Masakela, to name a few. He has toured with Dave Matthews and many others, countless wonderful African and African diaspora artists. You're definitely going to enjoy this performance. Thank you.
Dikonda mawa chifukwa kwatulo silina yende bwino nikonda masana chifukwa usiku umabweretsa katsitsi sono lero sikuoneka koma osati pamenepo kuona kukulupirira makamaka malonjezo akapangidwa onani ndiri ndichiyembekezo cha sogolo takanizani zomwe zingakali katikikondaza mawa oh mama oh baba titanizane oh mama oh mwana konda mawa dikonda mawa kwatana silina mbeke bwino tawona ndawi yoyipa komanso ntawi yokongola tieni tonse pamodzi tipeze umodzi wa mpavu madanda ulo sayenera kutipangitsa kumenyana onani ndiri ndichiyembekezo cha sogolo takanizani zomwe zingakali ngatikikondaza mawa oh mama, oh baba, titandizane. Oh mama, oh mwana, konda mawa. Oh mai, oh bambo, titandizane. Oh mama, oh mwana, konda mawa.
Greetings, fellow Africans. I'm very honored and excited to be a part of this wonderful conference. Pan-Africanism in a changing world order. That's really important issue to discuss. And as we know that this work, this Pan-Africanism work, has been there since African people were divided. And so that energy and struggle to unite African people will continue as championed by the grandfathers of Pan-Africanism, including Marcus Garvey, Kwame Nkrumah, and Julius Nyerere. We're here to kind of advance that cause. And I'm here to present a Pan-Africanist project that helps the cause and make sure that the younger generation understands what they need to do to move forward. This new project, is a musical project. I'm a musician all my life, growing up in Southern Africa, touring around the world. All I've done is to spread the message of African people through music and art. Like they used to say, my grandmother used to say, music and art without culture is not worth the effort. Now, this new project is called Ngoma Zetu. Ngoma Zetu is a shared Bantu word. This phrase, Ngoma Zetu, meaning our culture, our dance, our music, our song, our history. And so philosophically, all it means is our way of life, like embracing it, our way of life. And the title of this project is called The 7 Chapters of Mystery. The 7 chapters of mystery, basically, they are the 7 tenets of African life. And the mystery is because most African people at home and abroad, they are a mystery to themselves. They don't know themselves. They're defined by other people. So basically, or they try to kind of make themselves available to other people's ideas, and then they conclude that that's how African people should be. So the agenda is not set by Africans themselves, it's set by other people, and they follow and they think that that's Africanism. And so the 7 chapters on this include humanity, what Africans call humanity, African history, African oral tradition, African consciousness, African philosophy, African mythology, and African spirituality. And all these tenets of African way of life are part of our culture. So this project that I've done, it falls under the platform, or is presented under the auspices of a Pan-African Cultural Revolution Conference. Because without a cultural revolution, Pan-Africanism is dead. Africans will never go anywhere. Examples are over the world that before the Chinese developed, there was a cultural revolution to define who the Chinese were, who are the Chinese people, and the same applies to African people. So this is how this project came about, and I assembled some of the finest custodians of African culture, or what in Africa we consider child of the soil. I have Camille Zania from Algeria, a Berber from Algeria, who sings chapter 1. There's myself, Monges Indaga. I sing chapter 2. That chapter is on spirituality. I have Lorraine Klassen, who sings the chapter on African philosophy. I have Masauko, who sings the chapter on African mythology. I have Kuku, who sings the chapter on African oral tradition and history. I have the mighty Joshua, who sings African history, but also representing the diaspora, born in the United States in Charlottesville, Virginia. Then, of course, I have Vusi Mashasela singing on African gratitude, basically, you know, that's what it is. He focuses on African gratitude. And some of the chapters, I'm able to present 2 chapters today for you, so you can have a taste of what is Ngoma Zetu and what's in the 7 chapters of mystery. The first chapter is the chapter on African mythology, you know, and African mythology is one of the most misunderstood, just like many African disciplines. They are misunderstood, and most of it is deliberately, even among our people. They do deliberately because they're scared of that, but they also want to pretend and please somebody else that I'm not part of that thing. But African mythology is real as in real. And I'll give an example that most people of African descent, or African themselves in Africa, they make sense of like maybe events like Valentine's Day. It can be sensible to them. or just the myth of like maybe Friday the 13th, or not have like maybe room 13 in like certain buildings that make sense to them. And all these things, they're embraced because they've been presented by those that have conquered African people. But when you talk about African mythology, all of a sudden the bodies start to leave the room because that's how they've been indoctrinated. And so this piece, Massaoko Chipembere, he's the last born son of Malawi's independence hero, Henry Massaoko Chipembere, who had to leave his country in the 1960s because of persecution by other Africans who wanted power. So he had to run because, you know, they were after him. They wanted to kill him. So he left with his family, went to Tanzania for a few years, and then eventually ended up in Los Angeles. And that's where Massaoko was born. But the rest of his siblings were born in Malawi and Tanzania. So when I first met him, that was like the early part of the 2000s. And he had all these books because his mother has since moved back to Malawi, where she was born. And so he had all these books that he had collected on African spirituality, African mythology, African philosophy. His father was an intellectual, so, you know, like there's simple expression that, you know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. You know, that's how, it's just simple. And so his father was an intellectual, and so is his mother, and so he took after that. So when I met him, I was very interested because he's a guy with an American accent, born in Los Angeles, and he goes there and he finds the things that most Africans, even in Africa, live in Africa today, can find. So when I met him, immediately I realized that this guy was an intellectual, was a serious guy. So we became friends, and since then I've been helping him out, understanding some of the things African, because I was born and bred there. I went to all the African traditional events, so I'm very familiar with African way of life from the soil to the top of the tree. And so I wrote this song for him so he can share about some of the mythology that Africans have, especially things like you know, an owl, the bird, which flies by itself. It doesn't fly like in a flock. And for most African culture, that is all the way, you know, from, except for the Arab part of Africa, where it's not like indigenous African culture. They share that respect for that bird, that was every time, because it only comes in from dusk to dawn. That's the time that you see an owl. And they always feel that an owl is a bird that has come in to deliver some news. And so you have to pay attention to it. And so this song teaches African way of life through that mythology. And so this song is called Ndikonda Mawa, I Love Tomorrow, because yesterday didn't go that well. And I love daytime because the night brings an owl, you know, and most of the time, if an owl shows up, there's some news, and there could be some bad news. And the second chapter is Nyaka Nyaka. That's the one on African spirituality. I had to handle that myself because most people are scared to deal with African spirituality. I'm not scared of it because it's not what they think it is. I grew up there. I participated in it. I'll continue to participate in it because African spirituality, basically what it is gratitude. There's nothing, anything else in African spirituality than gratitude. So the other things that people talk about it, they don't know what they're talking about. If you find somebody talking about African spirituality in a frightening way, they're either lying or they're looking for attention. They don't know what they're talking about. I lived it. It's gratitude. That's all what it is. So this song is Nyaka Nyaka. And Nyaka Nyaka in isiZulu basically is commotion. In this context, basically, I'm singing about letting African people know that they have to shake off their hang-ups, the plantation and colonial hang-ups. You got to shake those things off and move and make peace with where your people have come from. Like we like to say ancestors, but all I'm saying is like, I'm going to where my people are spiritually, because if they were bad people, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be where I am today. If their way of thinking, their spirituality was bad, I wouldn't be here. So all I'm doing is like celebrating it, inviting the men, the women, the children, let's go. we're going to where they are. And most of Africa's spiritual experience is in the open. It's not in the building. We don't do buildings because it traps. We go out in the open, the mountains, the rivers. That's where we celebrate. We embrace ourselves. So this is Nyaka Nyaka. That's the song, the African spirituality. And we can talk more about that. You can go to ngomazetu.com, 7 chapters of mystery, and get more information to get a sense of the whole Pan-African Cultural Revolution Conference. Thank you.
Allow me to thank our community partners, Pan-African Heritage World, Florida Africana Studies Consortium, Ewart Junior Burton, and the entire Team AfriKin. We are AfriKin, a new way of being. Thank you. Peace and love.
Oh, new way of being African.
I hope you guys enjoyed the broadcast. I look forward to seeing you guys soon again. Remember, follow us at African Nation on all social media platforms and our website, afrikin.org. Continue to support us in our new way of being. We are AfriKin. Peace and love.
Vamos a unirnos de corazón, construye puentes con AfriKin, somos hermanos, dame un abrazo. AfriKin, esto es un canto, AfriKin, somos hermanos, AfriKin es un destino, AfriKin es un camino, AfriKin, esto es un canto, AfriKin, somos hermanos, AfriKin es un destino, AfriKin es un camino. África, mi negra linda, te observo con mucho orgullo, me siento como hijo tuyo, por eso soy AfriKin. AfriKin, AfriKin es el camino, AfriKin es tu destino. AfriKin, AfriKin es el camino, AfriKin es tu destino. Está pendiente la fuerza, la unión en la humanidad. AfriKin es tu destino. Vamos a unirnos ya. Oye, ven pa' acá. AfriKin es tu destino. AfriKin es tu camino.